I'm Martin, and I'm 16.
I'm Ariana and I'm 17.
I'm June and I'm 19.
I'm Lamar and I'm 17.
I'm Ari and I'm 23.
I'm Lacey and I'm 35.
I'm Amy and I'm 34.
I'm Jack and I'm 16.
I'm Paul and I'm 22.
All right, so are you ready? Yeah? Okay. So if you agree, turn your camera on and then you can talk about why you agree. So the first one is, if I were in an emergency or crisis, I would automatically call the police.
I said that I would, just thinking if I got into a car accident or I think mostly like health related, I would call 911. And that's, I think, the main option that I feel like I have right now. So that's why I said that.
Yeah, I mean the same. Like, I was always taught growing up, as soon as something went wrong and there was an emergency, that's what I should do. But I do realize that as someone who is white, that it's a little bit different for me as opposed to someone who is not, because there's not that same fear attached to it. I don't have to worry about, oh, the police are gonna turn on me, or all that stuff that others do because of the privilege I do have because of my skin color, which is unfortunate. But also just trying to recognize that in different situations and recognize that privilege depending on what situation it would be.
I know from personal experience, a little under 2 years ago, I got into a pretty bad accident. I broke 4 bones. So instinctually, the response was to call 911. The first responders, they all came, were police, and they were like, yeah, this is bad, and then radioed for an ambulance. It would have saved more time to just look up what number to call for an ambulance. And I mean, that wasn't a life-threatening incident, but when I'm lying on the ground, unable to move with searing pain, like, that's bad. I had no risk of the police becoming violent or anything. It was simply about saving time. I didn't need armed people. I needed healthcare.
Yes, if I was in a situation where I needed help, I'd probably just call 911.
So now people that didn't agree fully with the statement, can you talk about why?
Yes. So I would say my answer stems from a few things. One of the first ones being growing up in like pre-bankruptcy Detroit, there was a pretty good guarantee that if you called the police, they weren't going to be there anyway. I shared this on Twitter a couple weeks ago, and like a lot of the replies were the same thing, and just stories of Detroiters having called the police after being in pretty serious incidents or home invasions and stuff, and not hearing back from them for hours later. So a lot of my like just growing up in that and my kind of internal like just my own experiences kind of pushed me to not want to call the police at all if I don't have to.
A little bit of the same. I'm from the West Side, so a lot of it is you call the police and there's a 50% chance, depending on what the call is, that they'll be there within a reasonable amount of time, compared to like what you actually need them for. So like my house was robbed 4 times in a span of like 2 weeks when I was like 7. A couple of times through the kitchen, sometimes through my room, and none of it was like while we were there, but like it wasn't long after any of the time. But like the idea that calling them, they just weren't likely to come to our neighborhood. So you have that mixed in with, as I got older, like I'm above 6 feet and I have locks. So it's one of those where it's like, depending on where I am, like I have no idea if they're going to think that somebody else called. Especially because for whatever reason, there's this like stigma that like brown people don't articulate. So the idea that I articulate well enough, they're like, they might confuse me for someone else. It's never been like my first reaction. They're always like, oh, call 911. It's like, well, I mean, if I can handle it myself, then like if I broke a bone, then I'd just go to the hospital, or if something went wrong, it's like, okay, figure it out. I think that's my thing.
So turn your camera on if you agree.
I do agree with the statement in terms of how it is sparking not only a national conversation, but an international conversation about police brutality and all sorts of other things and systemic racism. And this movement in itself is not going to be the change, but I believe it is the catalyst, it's the spark for future change. And it'll be up to my generation and people who come after us in order to finally put an end to this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that and say that they've certainly been effective as a tool of awareness and of education for a lot of people who weren't familiar with this issue before. I think it's a little too early to tell how effective they are as far as long-term policy goes, but I definitely think we wouldn't have seen some of the things that have happened, some of the developments that happened in those cases without the protest.
I agree. I think it's sparked like important like discussions, and I like that everybody's been coming together to get rid of like systemic brutality and like racism. And I think it's a spark, but finished yet, so we don't know, like what you said. It's gonna be effective in the long run.
I think for the most part, it's been effective in more so showing the lengths that people are willing to go to maintain a state of like normalcy, whether it's police tear gassing or people who you wouldn't expect like coming out and like tearing down Confederate statues and all types of stuff. It's kind of a way to show like who's really willing to do the hard work. But like everybody else said, it's kind of like TBD to see how effective it is.
So if you agree, you can turn your camera on.
I think the police keep crime in check. Like, I don't know, but like even in like my neighborhood, if there is like a fire, like the police are like the people that would investigate the issues. And I know I've like personally like met some of like my neighborhood police, and I appreciate like the time that they take to kind of like investigate the problems in my neighborhood, but I know not everybody is fortunate enough to have that.
For me, part of my introduction into like community mobilizing was years ago through the community policing department of the Detroit Police Department. And so it was officers whose only job was to befriend communities and talk in schools and play roles of mentors and things like that. So when I think of police in the neighborhood, it's specifically community police, not like police who are there to solve crimes. Because a lot of the times when we went into a school, for example, it's a lot of instances that were diffused just through conversation with the community police. But of course they were Black for one, and we were in primarily Black schools. They were primarily male, which is not a huge presence of Black males in Detroit public schools. And they were trained to be kid friendly and be people friendly.
In the examples of kind of having like the community police officer or someone who is specifically trained to like work with students and be kind of like the friendly face. It's just like if you have these good elements within a bad system, those good elements are also still in the minority and aren't the real like factor, and so it's like why should you have these two different systems? Like it should be kind of the system overall. Like any officer should be able to approach students and be people friendly. And so I think kind of when thinking about if we need certain like good cops to play that role, then should cops be playing that role? Or, you know, like everyone said, should it be social workers, or should it be, you know, therapists, or people who actually are trained to deal with the real problems that we have? Yeah,
I think that a lot of the police that, you know, just kind of like walk around the neighborhood, they don't need their gun and their taser and all their weaponry. Personally, that police doesn't keep the neighborhood safe. That actually has an aura of danger to the neighborhood. And according to the broken window theory, if there is an aura of disorder, then people will lead to being criminal. Putting so many more police officers leads to criminality. So we don't need these patrolling police officers with all these weapons. We need patrolling social workers and counselors and sociologists to not be the state opposing the community, but the state working with and in the community.
I think the patrolling nature of American police, we know, is rooted in their origins as slave patrols, and I think a lot of the violence that we've seen perpetuated against Black people have started out as things like routine traffic stops, as, you know, small, like, supposedly like light conversations that police have with people, you know, to try to keep crime in check in a way. So I think, I don't know, I think there are communities in this country that don't regularly interact with police. You think about people in a lot of suburbs, even here, they don't have regular interactions with the police in the way that we tend to expect them to happen in Black and brown communities. So I don't think I personally don't believe that it's an imperative to have police in neighborhoods if there needs to be. I think there definitely needs to be some type of agency in place that like deals with crime and those types of things. But I think fundamentally we need the money that we can spend on like having community police can also be spent on having social workers. Like, how many do we have? They regularly see police officers but don't have a counselor, or have one counselor for one huge school, and things like that.
I think the reason why that people cannot help but be racially biased is just because of things that we see in the news and just other sorts of things that just come through just what we see in media, such as like sometimes I watch Fox News in order just to see what other people see. I like to take in both sides and compare. And I was watching a clip from Fox News from a couple of days ago, and all that they showed was Black people either looting, or one video showed a whole group of Black people stomping out this lone white person, and it was quite graphic, and just other sorts of things. You just see this imagery, and in like communities where there's not a lot of African Americans or the minorities, you just see this, and just seeing them, and you don't have other people to compare to, you just assume that that more people are like this. The majority of White people are like this. So it makes it hard not to see people in some light when that's all you know about them.
I think for humans, it's natural to have an us versus them idea, and maybe not always going to be racially motivated, but there will always be an in-group and an out-group, and it's currently usually racially. It can be ethnically, it can be class, and even if there's somehow everyone can get everything they ever need, there will always be this violence. We see like riots with sports teams. There will always be an in-group and an out-group, and there will always be bias.
We grow up with learning these biases. It's not something that we're just born with. It's something that's learned. But within our society, due to all the different ways we are socialized through school, with our parents, through media, it's impossible to drown all of that out. And everybody has biases, but I think that if we come to terms with the fact that, yes, we do all have these biases, but there are things we can do to try to unlearn them or to grow that anti-bias lens, I think that's important. So I think that one of the first things that needs to happen in order to do that is to accept that, yes, it's normal to have biases, it's human nature, but are these biases okay? Like, they're not just like, we need to learn to overcome them and see the world as it actually is.
Yeah, I didn't turn my camera on because I know that it's all because we're socialized to feel these things, and so that's like an act, that's like an active thing that happens to us because we're not necessarily born that way. And I think also because our country is so segregated and the educational opportunities are so disparate, people don't have the opportunities to interact with people. And because our neighborhoods are so segregated, people don't have opportunities to interact with people and just humanize them.
I didn't turn my camera on because I don't feel like, as a Black woman, I have a choice to discriminate or be racist. I mean, mentally I do, but if I want to get around the world, I have to be willing to act with people who don't look like me. So I feel like even though you may be around a certain social network or social upbringing, it's like you can end the cycle of poverty for yourself opposed to your family, or let's say even alcoholism or drug abuse or whatever it is that may be an ill habit or system that's in your family. It's up to you to be willing to try to learn about someone different. It'll be scary. You may not know which way to go, or even if it's not you're learning about it, just for you to not have the automatic negative thought about someone else. I haven't been around Indian people, but my thoughts about their culture is not automatically negative, regardless of what I see in the media. And it's like almost, it feels like an excuse to an extent, because people will say, well, that's all we see in the media. Well, you see a lot of other stuff in the media, but you don't fashion your life according to that. You don't make all of your thoughts and meditations about what you see in the media. So why to wrap your mind around discriminating or racism, but you're not doing some of the other crazy negative things that's in the media?
I didn't turn my camera on because biasness is learned and therefore it can be unlearned. So I agree with that. And people do inherently like to put other people in boxes, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be that way. And my general rule of thumb is don't judge somebody unless you know them, and don't stick one person on an entire group of people, because in the whole, everybody's a little different. So that's my rule of thumb.
Right now, what I'm doing to try to help in this fight to dismantle systemic racism and things of that nature, I am posting as much information about the protests and other sorts of things that are going on as possible. And I'm also donating to Black Lives Matter and other organizations, help them in their fight. And in the future, I hope to become a senator and or just some sort of person within government and to fight for legislation that can improve the social situation which is going on in our country today.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think one of the kind of to what I was saying earlier, there are elements of white supremacy and systemic racism everywhere, in every industry, within every institution, well, most institutions, and so I think anywhere we are, it exists, and it's on us to challenge it where we see it. like I talked earlier just about how like, you know, the history of planning has a lot of racism and those things like that. So I think even within our own spaces of expertise, like there are ways to learn about like, you know, how have these things been used as tools of oppression, and how do we turn them into tools of empowerment and tools of equity instead. So I think to me, there's enough of that spread across our entire society that there is a place for everyone in this fight.
Absolutely, I would agree with that too. I think, you know, educating ourselves and sharing resources, and then realizing our circle of influence, like whatever, you know, what others of you have said, and taking those opportunities to advocate for change. So,
and I also think one way to dismantle racism isn't even on, you don't even need to look at it on a macro scale. You can also look at it on a micro scale, just in terms of your friends, your family, just having conversations with them and teaching them what they can do to not have those same like thoughts and also views and that sort of stuff. I think that's a very important part of dismantling racism. I don't think it's all on the macro scale. I think a lot of it is just talking to other people.
I guess I didn't turn my camera on because like racism is just so large and complex, and like I can understand the links between like racism and poverty or class and other sources of oppression. I can understand like concrete policies that help solve some of these root causes or help solve some of these symptoms, but racism is just such a ingrained thing. I don't know concrete ways to fight it.
Yeah, I didn't turn my camera on because, like as you said, racism is such a large thing, and people have always kind of, you know, like not liked each other or put other people in boxes. And I feel like we can maybe make our societies like systems better, but it's really like a heart issue. And, you know, I don't think you can completely fix the problem, but you can make it better.
Well, as Barack Obama said a few weeks ago, or not a few weeks, but a few days ago, he said it's the young people that are taking the charge, and Joe Biden echoed that in another speech. And also, I remember my father saying something about a report that he saw that a 17-year-old African American helped organize a protest between police and protesters. And like seeing examples of that, it's just proof that young people can organize a way to protest against racism.
I think the main way I look at it is like if a 15-year-old starts making a large difference working with organizations, becomes an organizer themselves, they have 60 to 70 years more that they can do that. That can be their life goal. The 60-year-old starts, the due date hasn't changed. They just have less time to do it. But also, if you're poor, you're disenfranchised, you don't have access to healthcare, other things like that, you're not gonna live as long. And so the people that truly face oppression, they don't get the luxury of being old and spending time making that their life goal.
Yeah, I believe that youth can make a difference because it's usually the young that, like, they have lots of, like as you said, they have lots of time to change things. But I also think of the sit-ins that took place in the 60s and how much of a difference those made. And it was usually the youth that organized the sit-ins.
I think everyone agreed on this one. So just to kind of echo those words, kind of to what Jack, kind of as a pushback to what Jack was saying earlier, I think one of the tricks of systemic racism and of white supremacy is that as you learn more about it and start to see all the elements of our lives that it touches, it becomes this overwhelming thing that's like, oh my God, there's no way that we can change this. But there is, and I think, you know, I think we're at a time where so many people, especially like my age and younger, have seen so many changes in the world since we were like 4 years old when 9/11 happened. I think there is like I think there's a different energy behind this movement. I think the comforts that, I think the economic and just financial comfort that our parents were able to find, we don't have. And so in a lot of ways, I think that has pushed our generation to understand things more and to be more ready to fight the battles that we need to fight to move forward. So I think that makes me really hopeful, and just seeing the way that the knowledge that you all have is just seems to be getting earlier and earlier. Like I think I was fairly well versed in social justice stuff when I was in high school, but you guys have been able to make connections that like I just couldn't at that time. So I think the fact that that's becoming so much more a part of you all's lexicon, and just the way that you approach issues and the way that you talk about them in classrooms is going to be really impactful and change the way that we think about these things going forward.